Hello and welcome to the Human Factor, the LinkedIn Live of Inc. and Fast Company. I'm Eric Schoenberg, the CEO of Inc. and Fast Company. As the pandemic begins to recede, one of the most urgent decisions facing CEOs today is how to bring your team back to the office, if you should do it at all. And if you do, how you lead your company in what is certain to be a far more hybrid environment. I can tell you, my leadership team and I have been wrestling with this question for months. And let's face it, the stakes are high in a tight labor market. The wrong move could cost you valued colleagues and morale. Just ask Google and Apple, which have had some very high visibility stumbles in their back to office journeys. That's what makes this interview with today's guest so valuable. Jim Citrin leads executive search at Spencer Stuart's North American, the recruiter, Spencer Stuart. He's head of the North American CEO search and succession practice. In 27 years at the company, he's led more than 800 searches for board members, top execs, and CEOs. And he has seen it all. He's written 8 books on executive life and leadership. And his latest, Leading at a Distance, Practical Lessons for Virtual Success, has some amazing insights on this most challenging topic. It could not be more timely or wise. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Eric. Such a pleasure to be here. And hi, everybody. Pleasure to have this conversation. Timely indeed.
Jim, you're calling in from London.
That's right. I've
Hard
been hard at work here at after 7 o'clock, but it's light till about 10 now in June, so it's lovely. But one of the benefits of the work from remote has been the ability to be both in the New York area and in London, keeping everything going during this crazy, unprecedented time.
Yes. So the New York area is your home now, and where Spencer Stuart's headquarters is. Where are you from originally?
Originally, I'm from Long Island, New York. Grew up in Great Neck, Long Island, went to Vassar College and Harvard Business School, and lived in Paris when I was with McKinsey, and came back to Connecticut, and we've been with Spencer Stuart for the last 27 years, as you mentioned.
Well, McKinsey, Harvard Business School. I'm glad you've risen above your origins and the level of success. You've been at Spencer Stuart for 27 years.
Yeah.
You must like it. What is it that appeals to you about the gig? What's the best part?
I absolutely love it, and I love people. I've always been driven by 2 things, and it's really the theme of my career. And I ask people this: what gives them energy? And I know, Eric, you and I have had lots of great chats about this. 2 things have given me energy for all these times. One is relationships, and 2 is learning. And that's why this conversation is so valuable for me, because we have a relationship, we have a lot of mutual friends, and really forging relationships with leaders at all levels and helping them on their journeys has been something I did as a college interviewer, all the way when I led analyst recruiting out of business school. And I just love that. But then also when I was at McKinsey, I did learn the power of research as a way to advise clients. And when I came to Spencer Stuart, I had this crazy idea in the mid 90s, actually it was 1997, to write the In Search of Excellence. For those of you who are old enough to know that best-selling book in the mid 80s by Tom Peters and Bob Waterman of McKinsey. And what was the In Search of Excellence of the best CEOs? Who are the best CEOs in America? What are their personal stories? What are the common characteristics? And what could we all learn from them? And that really set upon a journey of learning and research, and then sharing about it and infusing that into the relationship aspect. So this is just a continuation of that wonderful process. But the idea of actually recruiting leaders to organizations, whether it's the CEOs of PayPal or eBay, or again, scores and scores, or board directors at Amazon or Microsoft or whatever, you really have the opportunity to change people's lives, and hopefully for the better.
That's great. That's a great answer. Research and relationships. Your book is chock full of research, which is one of the amazing things about it. Often, the way to start an interview about a book is to ask you what motivated you to write the book at this particular time. But I think that's question kind of answers itself in the middle of a pandemic and
Well, it, it,
remote
it
work.
is it is actually kind of funny because, as you said, I've written 7 books, but before this,
Uh-huh.
um, we at Spencer Stuart, we recruited an individual now a year and a half ago. She started in January of 2020. Her name is Darlene DeRosa. She's my co-author, and when she joined, she'd built a practice of consulting and advising firms and individuals on remote leadership. I kid you not. I met her in January of 2020. She told me her story, and she got a PhD in virtual teams and virtual leadership 15 years ago. And I literally said, Darlene, that is the most obscure PhD in history. That was my first words. And lo and behold, 3 months later, when we all went into lockdown, her research and experience on how to lead virtual meetings, how to recruit virtually, how to onboard, how to build culture, became absolutely front and center. And then it was only last summer when Wiley approached us to say, you guys really need to write the definitive book on remote leadership and working at a distance. And so from August until November, we did over 100 CEO interviews. We surveyed 600 virtual teams. We did surveys through LinkedIn and through our own Concentric Spencer Stuart platform with over 1,000 individuals. So we did a lot of research in that. And so now the timing has been very, very fortunate.
Yes, for sure. And that's an amazing story about Darlene. She's sort of the Zoom of consultants, isn't she?
It's true. It's funny. What my second book back in actually it was 2001, was called Zoom, and Eric Yuan never gave me royalties to the company Zoom. But anyways, yes, we're very fortunate that Darlene has had this, and it's been a great kind of partnership because she knows more than anybody on the planet about this topic. And I've had the opportunity to, the fun thing about this particular book, Eric, because everyone who's watching, every one of us, everyone who's got kids or who is a kid or has been going through this universal experience over the last 18 months, I've never before had an experience where we had a response rate of 100%. Every single person who we asked to talk about, to do research with or share research with, has participated enthusiastically because it's this been universal experience. Everyone wants to know what everybody else is doing, and we're all learning at the same time. So it's been unlike any of the other books that I've ever written. It's been quite a journey.
That's amazing, Jim. 100%. Everyone wants to talk about it. All right.
Everyone, I mean, just think
With
about
all that research,
it. Yeah.
is there one takeaway that really surprised you?
I think that there are a couple of big takeaways, but the one, if you had forced me to pick one, it's how leadership is changing necessarily in this because of not only a crisis, but working remotely. So the big point is how leadership is changing. And let me tell you about that, Eric, because again, you guys at Inc. and Fast Company, you write about leadership and trends all the time. We As you mentioned in the introduction, I lead Spencer Stuart's CEO practice. We've been recruiting and advising CEOs for over 65 years. We've done research on leadership. We know a lot about leadership. Leadership, kind of the rubber hits the road when boards have to make a CEO decision. And behind every CEO decision, whether it's a promote from within succession or it's a recruit from external, the anchor to that process is a CEO specification, a position spec.
Mhm.
What are the leadership requirements of where an organization is and is likely to go? We write CEO specs, and we've done a study of how CEO specs have changed over time. And this underscores the point of how leadership is changing in this remote world and now hybrid world. over the last 10 years, there's been a slow and gradual increase in a few things, including the focus from just shareholder capitalism to broader stakeholder management. That's been a slow and steady increase over the last 9 years. However, in the last now year or 16 months, that has spiked. The rise and the power of purpose and mission in the leadership specifications. I'm sure every one of your readers and your viewers kind of sense this, and this importance of purpose is more important than ever before, but now it's explicit. And that's one of the two ways that leadership is changing dramatically.
What's the other?
So the other is the necessity to have different and rigorous processes that allow remote or hybrid teams to operate with the balance of autonomy and flexibility that the physical distance necessitates, and what many and most people want. They want this flexibility, but it can't just be without any process. So actually, how do you do performance management? How do you do your financial reporting? How do you set objectives? How do you onboard employees? So how you adapt your processes. We like to think purpose and process are the two anchors. Most leaders, Eric, end up kind of leaning toward one of those two sides. And it's really important for leaders, managers, whether it's a team leader or a CEO, to be very conscious of where they lean and to try and be balanced with purpose and process. And what we write about in the book, there's a lot of very tactical and important ways that I think are actually easier remotely than it is in person, about how to do those things right. So I think leadership is changing purpose and process.
Mhm.
But one of the things that is really great about where we are, I think, in the world of leadership is authenticity, vulnerability, just being a real, normal human being is now more important than ever. Because if you can do that and link to the why and why we're doing what we're doing, you asked me what gives me energy, relationships, and research. As long as leaders are true and transparent and authentic about their why, then they can actually let go of having to be perfect, having to know everything, and especially operating in a remote environment where people are behind a screen and they're kind of sometimes cynical, sometimes really needing that kind of encouragement. People can sniff out BS artists or people just trying to say the party line. So being a normal, generous, kind human being is actually really important too. And I think that's a really positive development.
A lot to unpack there, Jim. Let me ask about authenticity first of all. The sort of guru of authenticity, the avatar of authenticity, is Adam Grant, who, by the way, has endorsed your book. He wrote a well-regarded essay about authenticity as being overrated. Is authenticity overrated? Can you go too far?
I don't think he was saying it's overrated. And no, you can't go too far. It doesn't mean where it goes too far is if you are, it's kind of things that, parents hopefully tell their kids or bosses. It's really important to be clear, transparent, authentic. Doesn't mean you have to do what people actually want or they want. You don't have to be liked. You have to be more respected. People want clarity, especially in this remote. And we'll get to, I'm sure, this how CEOs and managers or HR leaders are navigating the back to the office. Clarity, even if it's not exactly what everyone wants. Everyone wants all the flexibility in the world. They want to work wherever they want to work and whenever they want to work. They want to get more money and they want more. They can't have it all. But what employees really want is to know what the rules of the road are and that they make sense in an authentic way to the culture and led by example by the leaders. So I don't think you can go too far on authenticity, but I think authenticity can then get conflated with, oh, just trying to be popular or trying to be likable. Those can be slippery slopes for leaders.
Okay, good. One of the items in the trove of research that you and Darlene turned up in researching this book was the fact that while in the population at large, the pandemic was for many people a net positive. For CEOs, by and large, the average CEO, it was a net negative. Why do you suppose that was?
Well, we did that research starting in August, and that the CEO survey and interviews went from August till October, and we have the research well articulated in the book. They felt that they had to keep their organizations healthy and or at least viable. I mean, when many companies' business pretty much stopped in late March and April and May, and massive cost cutting was needed to be done, and
Mm,
people were dealing with having to, on the one hand, keep their organizations as healthy as possible, making tough decisions, but on the other hand, having to deal with health and life and death decisions and bereavements. And they felt extraordinarily personal. I'm sure you saw this with lots of your friends and lots of contributors to Inc. and Fast Company. I mean, they worked more hours. They felt more personally responsible. I think in this authenticity, most CEOs I saw, they really were doing this and living this in a very authentic way, but they felt like the pressure was greater than ever before. It was still, most of them, we said, so we asked them, is it a net positive, a net negative, a net neutral for you personally and your organization? Many of them really relished the productivity gains for themselves and their teams. They liked really not having the expectation to be traveling to see customers, and more customers or investors, board members were more available. They actually liked that. Where it got tough on the CEOs was this notion that they didn't almost want to say or admit that they actually liked it more, even though many of them truly did. They liked not having to go to Davos. They liked not having to go see a big customer. They they did that, and many. Uh, but this thing really struck different cohorts very differently. Again, I'm sure you know personally, and friends and colleagues at Inc. and Fast Company. I mean, if you're a single mom with kids who are being remote school, it's brutal. If you're a CEO who has a second home in the mountains or by the sea with good Wi-Fi, and you've got your older kids who come to spend with you, I mean, I have many CEO friends who loved it and had incredibly positive experiences, but they couldn't really share that they really loved it so much. But they were really feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders, I think.
yeah, I can see that distinction. Uh, I can see also how the leadership aspect is challenged by a remote working environment. For example, trust is essential to successful teams, and yet in an environment, in a kind of social environment where trust is eroding in so many institutions, keeping it going from a remote location is a lot harder. How do you recommend in your book that people in leadership roles maintain trust on their teams?
Well, I'm glad you put it in the broader context because many uh, are familiar with Richard Edelman and the trust barometer that Edelman has done for many years. And so in a broader context of trust being eroded in traditional leadership roles, government, politics, institutions, academia, healthcare, uh, corporate trust in corporate leaders actually has been going up and up and up. So the trust and the expectations on corporate leaders have gone up. So they have both an opportunity based on their leadership roles to build on that trust and to really turn it hopefully for the benefit of the organization and the people that they're leading. But there are difficult adaptations that need to be made to exercise, to cultivate trust in remote teams. And I'm not just talking about CEOs, I'm talking about teams of 5 or 6. And it goes back to authenticity, and it goes to almost mathematics. Um, I, I estimate that for every hour of an in-person interaction, now just based where trust is the currency,
Mhm,
you need
mhm.
probably 3 times that amount of time in a remote sense to equal that. So quantity can actually overcome quality in a sense. If you keep in mind that, okay, if you have a 3-hour dinner with somebody, then you might need 3 times that amount of virtual Teams or Zoom kind of conversations over the coming month or two. But you can actually catch up, uh, recognizing more frequent touch points. Doesn't have to be as in-depth moments. One of the great findings we did in the book is that leaders who started feeling the need to have structured business conversations on an agenda basis at a scheduled amount of time remotely, they found that actually making them less formal and more frequent actually increased the amount of progress on building both the kind of structured business driving, but also on the trust aspect. Just a 10-minute FaceTime or even a phone call if you're not quarantined, when you're out, walking or something, just to say, hey, Eric, how's it going? How's your mom? I know she was, doing that, or, okay, how are the kids doing? And a number of leaders found that they've been able to make more powerful and faster cultural change by doing more frequent touch points without the formal agendas. And the ability to communicate broadly has been, I think, a real opportunity, because the expectations of having to be there at the sales kickoff and having to be there at the quarterly
Mhm, mhm.
business ops review gave way to more, again, to repeated authentic kind of conversations.
That sounds like a good segue to one of the chapters in your book, which I found fascinating, was what you described as or coined rather, as the ramp method of improving team performances. The first R in that stands for relationships. So tell us about ramp and how it works.
So it's a model. I mean, Darlene, kind of based on a lot of research, came up with this model, and it's a good name because it does show that there can be momentum when you put these pieces together. But I like to focus on the two ends of that,
Hmm.
which again are relationships and process, and how managers have to think about forging relationships in 2 dimensions, and now sometimes hopefully 3 dimensions, and how 2 dimensions and 3-dimensional relationships go together. Great comment was from David Zaslav, the CEO of Discovery.
Hmm.
He said that it's relatively easy to go from a 3-dimensional relationship where you have a history of trust and relationships to a 2-dimensional screen than it is to go from a 2-dimensional relationship to a 3-dimensional relationship. So David Solomon talked about how, and he's been very public along with Jamie Dimon, about the importance of trying to get their teams back to the office as quickly and boldly as possible. But they talked about the summer of 2020 onboarding over 1,000 new college grads, all virtually. And how do you build the relationships there? And so you break it down to what it takes to create a relationship, which is, as you said, trust is the kind of aspect, but caring, communication, and then all the way up to on the process side, you don't want to micromanage, because that's the thing that will drive, especially in a tight labor market, as you mentioned. People do not want to be micromanaged, but if they're working remotely and the touch points are, you can't manage by walking around, you really need a structured process for keeping things alive. So anyway, those are a couple of the insights of the ramp model.
Are there, you mentioned David Solomon, David Zaslow. Are there companies where you see the ramp model being used well?
One of the great examples, I would say, is first of all, it's relatively easier in tech companies,
Hmm.
and they've had more experience with hybrid or remote teams, engineers from different locations. The nature of their work has allowed development to happen in distributed places and collaborating over various platforms and all of that. But I'd say one of the companies that has done this extremely well is Starbucks, and Kevin Johnson has done an extraordinary job at the company, and they historically are very much in a very different way, but share a similarity to Goldman and J.P. Morgan. You wouldn't think of that, but they're very much an in-person apprenticeship company that draws its culture from the stores that all of us know and many of us love. The in-person experience between the barista and the store manager and the customers, and that goes all the way to the headquarters. And they have a very interesting back to office kind of philosophy that we can talk about. But they did some relationship based things early on, which goes to their deep value of caring, they call their employees partners, putting the Starbucks partners first, their health, their safety, their welfare. They paid their partners even when they shuttered stores or furloughed. They kept the benefits going, and so they put the authenticity and the relationships right there. But then they did some really clever things on the process front on training. Well, they had the advantage also because they're huge in China. And so they saw what was happening in the first 3 months of 2020. And so they were able to develop processes to deploy in other parts of the world that worked, such as how to turn their stores into drive-through locations, how to have the PPE equipment very, very really early on, and then how they actually have now rethought about what the role of the headquarters is, and recognizing that one of the things they did, and many companies have done a good job, is sort of setting expectations about what is expected. But they're rethinking that they need to create a reason that an employee or a partner in their case can not only add more value, but have a better experience in the office versus working remotely. So if you put, and they call their, instead of a global headquarters, it's really a global service center. So they feel like they're there to serve the field. So it's wonderful things like that. And in field operated kind of companies, we interviewed NASA for this as well, which I didn't really know this before, but they're a very field oriented organization with centers all over the place. Both Starbucks and NASA and Hilton and others, where you have distributed workforces, you have to figure out where the leverage is in the system. And so in a lot of those places, they're the district managers. And so how do you you create the training and the tools for the district managers to play the role of the relationship, purpose, healing person on the one hand, but how do they then manage to drive the business forward on the other hand? And a company like Starbucks did particularly well by both caring for those district managers, but training them and kind of propping them up to be big leaders as well. So it's really interesting. But the thing is, I mean, we're all human beings are extraordinarily adaptable with how we've survived all these years, and hopefully we'll continue to adapt. I mean, we've all experienced. I mean, look at what the healthcare profession has done. Look at what schools and teachers have done. Look what kids have done. So everybody's adapting, and every company's been doing the best they can. And I've been generally very impressed with a lot of the moves that people made out of a place of caring. And we're all fortunate that the tech infrastructure in many places survived, was strong enough to allow very rapid shifts to remote work, really starting in March of 2020, at least in the United States.
Okay. All right. Great. I want to broaden the discussion to what you mentioned at the very top of this interview, which was in search of excellence. You've seen so many CEOs, both successful ones and failures. What distinguishes the successful ones from those who aren't so successful? What traits would you say?
So I think that we we uh, we have a great leadership model at Spencer Stuart with a lot of academics behind it, and a lot of things we like to say above the surface, which are the experiences, and below the surface, which are character and other things. If you think of a tree, the roots below the surface are a lot of the things that create the health, and that are the more unseen attributes of a person and their resilience and their character and their motivations. And the above the ground, the trunk of a tree and the leaves are more what have they done. But I actually like to simplify it down to two things. Uh, and this is what I've seen and I believe. By the way, styles can be across the gamut. It can be across the gamut. You can have the most introverted, shy, uh, person who can be inspiring in her or his own way. You can have the most charismatic person inspire in their way. Um, but style is not the issue. There are two things that I think make define what great leadership is. One is people leadership, and secondly is thought leadership. To be a great leader of an organization or a team, you really have to have both people leadership and thought leadership. Now, you can go below the surface of that. What does it take to be a great people leader? You need to care about people. You need to be authentic. You need to be transparent. You need to have integrity. You need to lead by example. You need to do all of those things. Otherwise, especially in a remote or a hybrid world, it's just not going to work. People are not going to follow you. But it's not enough just to be a great people leader. And no one can do it alone in a more interconnected world than ever before. The job of the leader, whether it's the team leader or the CEO, is to be the thought leader of the organization, to set the direction. Where are we going? Why? In what strategic context? What is our competitive advantage? But setting the direction that makes sense. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be in the direction that moves an organization constructively forward, then bringing people along with you to execute that. So if you just if our audience remembers nothing else, the real summary of great leadership is people leadership and thought leadership. You really have to do both. And I advise CEOs and aspiring CEOs all the time. You don't have to do it all yourself. In fact, our great mutual friend Hubert Joly, who I recruited to Best Buy in 2012 as a completely illogical, out of industry CEO. He did a magnificent job saving, turning around, growing Best Buy. And he was the thought leader and he was the people leader. And it's a great case study. Or Mark Thompson at the New York Times Company did a similar thing: thought leadership, people leadership. So we can go and unpack. Look at what Satya Nadella is doing at Microsoft. Bob Iger did it starting in 2005 at Disney. That's the simplest way to think about what makes great leaders.
That is great. People leadership, thought leadership. One more question before we go. Uh, Jim, you're at the top of your profession. Are there things that you wish you had known when you just got started, um, and that you would like to communicate to anyone just getting an early start in their career right now?
What One of the things it's funny. I was advising a CEO candidate today, who's this brilliant 39-year-old tech CEO who had been an Olympic gold medalist. The guy has it all, and I was telling him about, based on all the career research I've done, he was basically asking kind of like, where am I going from here? And thinking about various things. And as a way to think about one's career, and then I'll come back to the second part of the question about what I either wish I knew or what I wish I would know. I said, look, the way to think about careers is there are really three things that we all want that are often at war with one another. One is we all want to be deeply satisfied by the work we're doing. We want it to be important. We would like it to play to our strengths. We'd like to have a positive impact. We'd like to be affiliated with people that we really like and respect. We'd like to work with brands that we're really proud of. I'll call that job satisfaction, the inherent quality of what we're doing. Great. People need to make a living, and we would like to be compensated and like to make some money in both current compensation and perhaps long-term compensation or equity. But there's also, especially before working remotely, lifestyle is really important as well. And that goes to, where do you want to live? How long is your commute? Back when people commuted, how many hours do you work? How much control over your schedule do you have? So I always have found and say that it's not impossible to maximize all three aspects of what I call the career triangle: job satisfaction, compensation, and lifestyle. It's just very difficult to maximize those at the same time. You think about, if you put any job through that simple little triangle framework, you can realize, oh, I love being a journalist, but oh, you can't really make good money like this, and the hours are crazy. Or, oh, I just love playing tennis. I love to be a tennis pro, but whatever. So it's really hard to do that. And what I was telling this CEO is, you can have it all, but you don't have to have it all the time and at the same point of time. There are different phases of a career and a life. And so that's one thing in terms of advice, depending on where you are with, whatever stage of your career, with your family, with your partners, with your life, whatever it is. And so that's a piece of advice. In terms of what I wish I knew then, I mean, I really think of myself as being on a learning journey, and I feel just like in your business, we both have the privilege to talk to lots of smart and talented people, and being an insatiable learner is a wonderful thing. One thing I wish I knew a little more then, but I'm really focused on now is uh, founders, and how entrepreneurs who are founding companies, which are now scaling faster than ever and becoming more, what is different about them, and how can they scale from kind of the entrepreneur to the great leader?
Mm-hmm.
The creation of the 1 in a million, 1 in a billion Jeff Bezos types, what are those characteristics, and how do they surround themselves with great talent, and how do they have to adapt? That's something I'm really interested in right now for this next phase, because I think that corporate leadership is great and important, but more companies are getting bigger, faster, more powerful, more quickly than ever. And I think that's a really exciting place for great people to be thinking about, whether they found organizations themselves or work with founders. Understanding them is something that is definitely going to be a theme for me over the next 5 years.
Well, Jim, I know exactly what you mean about one of the great things about my job is being able to talk to smart, talented people. Case in point, my friend.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. This has been The Human Factor, the LinkedIn Live of Inc. and Fast Company. I'm Eric Schoenberg. Thanks to Brian Cornelius behind the camera, Rose Levy, and Kathleen Minello for making it all happen. And thanks to our guest, Jim Citrin. Read his book, Leadership at a Distance. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.